I'm going to go through the menu bar. Now, just to give you a perspective and maybe an expectation, most of the things that are listed into this menu bar are literally included into the user interface. So I'm not going to spend much time going through them. And other things that we're going to be talking about, most of them, you're just going to have a mental sort of exercise where you're going to remember the shortcuts. Because most of the shortcuts, if you're coming from After Effects, most of the shortcuts are basically the same, right? For example, when I go into the file, for you to create a new scene in Cavalry, it's actually Ctrl-N. It's the same thing in After Effects. To open a project, same thing in After Effects. Here you can open some of the recent projects that we've been working from or working with. You can restore and autosave. I will show us how that basically works in the coming tutorials. You can save. This basically works in any software. It's Ctrl-S. You can save as, which is Ctrl-Shift-S. Same thing with After Effects, import assets. Now there are these pro features. Now I'm intentionally using the free version to show us what the pro features basically are, and then I will show us in some other tutorials and coming tutorials with the pro version how basically these basically work, right? So there's a place where you can import a reference, import Google Sheets. Apparently in After Effects you need a plugin to actually do this, import what they call a smart an image smart folder. I'll show us what basically that is. There's a place where you can import an audio smart folder. Also, I'll show us how that basically is, how smart that folder basically is, right? Then you can export Lottie files. Apparently, in After Effects, you need a plugin called Lottie files. Another one is called Body Moving. It's actually free. Apparently, in Cavalry, you don't need a plugin to do that. So you can export as a project settings, show the project folder and stuff like that. Now, most of the things are literally included within the UI. For example, for you to create maybe a composition or something like that, it is Ctrl-Shift-N, for you to create a composition and stuff like that. Most of these settings within the composition sort of settings are also included, within the panel. Now, most of these you can literally set them by pressing Ctrl-K. There's some settings are just down here. For example, on the tools, once we go through the tools, most of the tools actually included here, right? At the same tools literally within this sort of a section. If I press on a star and then you see it's actually enabled within the UI, except some tools. For example, there's a tool called Super Shape, right? It's not really into the user sort of interface. Once I press out and create it within the center, you can see that it's very, very different. It has different sort of parameters in the attribute sort of editor, which makes it more of a super tool. So it's not included into the UI. So some of these things are not included into the UI, but most of them are within the UI. So the view settings, we shall go through them, but most of them are basically more or less the same. As in After Effects, you can show rulers, show guides, ruler options, pixel grids and stuff like that. Now, most of the things you're not really going to be going into them, right? You can save a snapshot, different things, show snapshots, zoom out and zoom in. Most of the things are going to be using shortcuts, and you're not going to really be going through them over and over. So you just need one or two things in here in most of your compositions and your sort of projects that you'll be working on. So I'm not going to be spending much time going through them because it will require mental memory, which you really don't need to exercise apparently. Same thing within the editing. You can copy Ctrl-C, Ctrl-Z, same shortcuts elsewhere. You can do group stuff, group and flatten them. Somebody uses Figma, the same sort of shortcuts for grouping and ungrouping. You can add objects to a group and a lot of different sort of things. There's also some other preferences, which is actually a very long list, right? I wouldn't prefer it being a long list, but it's actually a long list. I would prefer if there are literally different sort of tabs. It will give somebody, a better sort of user experience. But yeah, there's a long list, which I'll actually make a different tutorial about. So you can create compositions and, different composition settings. You can create stuff. Now here, there are lots of behaviors effects. As I've said, most of the things are literally within the user interface. If I come here, there's a shortcut to it. It's actually Control or Command period, right? You can actually see most of these. As you can see, most of the things which are listed within, here, they are basically the same thing within the user interface. That's why I don't want to really spend a lot of time into this. Yeah, so the different panels, the shapes, the tools, the dynamics, the windows, scripts, and help. So yeah, we shall be going through some of these things. You don't need to remember them, so I won't spend much time going into them or through them. So apparently here we have the demo scenes. Now these are just important for you to know what they basically are. For example, if I click on one of the demo scenes, which is the kinetic type, it shows us some of the scenes that were previously made for you to see how the software basically works. If I play it, you can see how basically, it plays out and basically how it was created. So those are the demo scenes. There are actually different demo scenes in here. There's one which has maybe some forge dynamics. I should talk about it. Yeah, so as you can see, there are different sort of demo scenes, and they do different things. Apparently here we have a duplicator. Now with the duplicator, we're going to have multiple sort of tutorials on how it works. If I click on the shape, I've just created a shape by pressing Alt or Option. I then clicked on, this sort of a thingy on the create shape, right? Once I click on a duplicator, it will show us a duplicator. Now I'm going to talk about what the attribute sort of panel is, but what a duplicator basically does, it duplicates anything that you really click on, whether it's a group or a shape. I'll talk about a duplicator in, that we shall have lots of tutorials to show us how the duplicator basically works. Now we have the extrude sort of a shape. I'll show us from the pro version how basically it works, but it's apparently a pro feature. Same thing with the forge dynamics, it's a pro feature. We have what we call the particle system. Somebody has used particular in After Effects. Basically that's the same sort of a thingy in here, whether by Boris or any other sort of providers. Then we have something called the auto animate deformer, which will talk about what basically it does. Then we have the align behavior. Now most of the things still can be accessed in here. For example, if we go into the behavior, as you can see, the align deformer here is the same thing as the one which is shown up here. Then these are literally rigging tools. If somebody has used any rigging sort of tools. Now in After Effects, there are more of scripts and plugins. If somebody has used Rubber Hose, now this is called Rubber Hose. There's something called Rubber Hose 3 in After Effects. It's more of a plugin. Another one's called Limber. So all these are literally rigging tools for rigging characters and stuff like that. Then we have the shapes. You can create different sort of shapes, cell-made shapes. And then we have the create text along path, as you can see in here, just like that in Illustrator. Then we have the sequencing sort of a thingies behaviors in here. We should talk about what they basically are, when you're sequencing objects in the future. Then we have the layout sort of tools. You can lay out, stuff in different ways. If somebody has used the layout in Framer or in Cavalry or in Rive, basically works the same way, right? The layout sort of features, we should talk about them. There's also another option for enabling them down here in the composition. And then we have the camera. So that's basically to do with the menu bar up here. And yeah, so that's basically it. The next sort of video or tutorial we're going to be literally going through, we shall talk about the asset sort of panel or the project panel and what it basically does. So yeah, that's